Hello and welcome to ET Insight, where we get you a 360-degree view of the big picture in business and economy. I'm Sridhar Ramakrishnan, and here's what we have for you on the show today. Why the inflation monster continues to haunt the Indian consumer, which is you. The RBI is fighting inflation with one hand tied to its back. No wonder it's not winning the fight. And Dr. C. Rangarajan, Chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, tells you why the inflation battle can still be won. Our top story first. Life for the Aam Aadmi is getting tougher by the day. Food prices have been rising relentlessly these past few months. While the government and the RBI are pushing all levers to keep prices under check, they just don't seem to be winning. Asha Gopalakrishnan tells you why inflation, particularly in food prices, is proving to be one tough nut to crack.
Food prices are going globally, energy prices are growing globally. We cannot insulate ourselves totally.
Whatever be the cause, the fact remains that inflation is something which needs to be tackled with great urgency.
It's clear that the underlying pressure on inflation remains a cause of worry.
India's worry is not unique. Inflation has been weighing down the global economy too. Thanks to America and most other parts of the developed world keeping their interest rates at near zero levels, there's too much money sloshing around. And that's driving up prices of commodities. As a result, the emerging economies, which are still growing at robust rates, find prices of goods going up.
Real pressure on inflation actually runs the risk of coming from oil. And how transmission of that happens, it has to be either through higher fiscal deficit, or it has to be through transmission through higher prices. Either way, we will see that have an impact across a range of industries. Therefore, I do believe that inflation is a big issue at this stage of India's growth.
What makes India's case peculiar is the fact that only a fraction of the oil price hikes have been passed on to the consumers yet.
Politicians always try price controls, and they never work. They always make the situation worse when you have price controls. If you say to a farmer, you can only sell your rice for 3 rupees, he's not going to produce any rice. If you say to consumers, rice only costs 3 rupees, they're going to eat a lot of rice if it's only 3 rupees. And so you have huge shortages, prices get worse, the crisis gets worse, and then eventually prices skyrocket when the politicians realize they've done it wrong again.
According to a report by Goldman Sachs, every $10 increase in oil prices raises India's deficit by about 20 basis points. It states that the Indian government can reduce this deficit by 20 basis points by raising administered prices by 10%. But the probability of that happening is bleak because of inflationary pressures. Even if oil prices decline in the near future, India's inflation scenario is not looking any brighter, because the pass-through to inflation from previous increases is likely to be high. And if the government increases administered part of fuel prices, there could be a sharper increase in fuel price inflation. Goldman Sachs has downgraded its FY12 GDP forecast for India from 8.7% to 7.8% and raised its inflation forecast to 7.5% versus 6.7%. Ditto with Nomura.
We have at Nomura raised our average inflation forecast to 8.6%. And this is concerning because, fiscal 11, the average inflation was 9.4%. So 8.5 on top of a 9.5 is a fairly steep number.
According to the Reserve Bank of India, manufactured non-food products have driven inflation last year, followed by primary food articles, fuel, power, light and lubricants, and primary non-food articles.
It's manufactured product inflation, which is 60% of the WPI basket. That is driving inflation, and that's a direct consequence of the sharp rise in commodity prices that we saw during August to December of 2010. Because usually commodity prices increase or decline, as the case may be, they have a 4 to 6 month time lag, with which they get reflected in the in the manufactured product prices.
From manufactured products to food prices. Vegetables, fruits, milk, eggs, fish and meat have been the major contributors to food inflation in recent months, indicating that consumption patterns in India are changing dramatically.
Some of the increase in the prices of relatively superior food products like milk, eggs, meat and fish is partly attributable to rising income levels. This itself is a corollary of faster growth and the effectiveness of our programs of social inclusion, which have succeeded in putting relatively more income in the hands of the poorer sections of the community.
There's more money in the hands of people and demand has risen. But production has not grown commensurately, and that ensures that prices remain high.
We have the news from the Ministry of Agriculture saying that food grain production has touched an all-time high. Pulses production has reached an all-time high, oilseeds production has reached an all-time high, and so on. But yet we see that the prices have not come down in the market.
That's largely because the daily per capita availability of food grains today is lower than what it was in the mid-80s. Greater affluence in that period also means that there's too much money chasing too few goods.
I think RBI has to work on the monetary policy, which has led to somewhat excess liquidity in the system. Both the fiscal policies had been somewhat loose and the monetary policy has been very liberal. I think they have to keep tightening that spot.
But these policies can't really have much of an impact on food inflation, which has grown unabated from 5.97% in 2007-2008 to 14.52% last year. That's because food inflation has mostly been led by supply chain constraints and the dominance of middlemen and agents in the value chain. And that means that the government needs to do a whole lot more than it is doing currently to improve the state of affairs.
It's about structurally addressing the supply situation, because the demand for food and food products is likely to go up as India becomes more and more affluent. And I think what we really need is investment in agriculture, improvement in productivity in agriculture. We haven't seen big increases in productivity for a long time.
The good news is that the rain gods are expected to be kind this year. But the bad news is that the government insists on controlling inflation through monetary measures like raising interest rates alone. Experts say that if India wants to avoid an inflation shock, it is important for the country to get its fiscal health in order.
So why is monetary policy the government's only tool to fight inflation? And is there a magic inflation number that will ensure that your wallet doesn't burn a hole and the RBI governor also gets to sleep at night? Well, that and more is coming up in just a bit. Don't go away.